The streets of 1970s Harlem were alive with music, energy, and ambition, but beneath the rhythm and soul of the city, a darker power was rising. Neon lights glint off sleek luxury cars as well-dressed men and women walk the sidewalks. Jazz drifts from open doors, but the undercurrent of crime is impossible to ignore. In the shadows of the city's bustling life, one man was quietly building an empire that would make him both feared and revered. That man was Nicky Barnes. Known to some as the Godfather of Harlem, Barnes was more than just a drug dealer. He was a mastermind, a strategist, and a figure whose name would become synonymous with power, wealth, and danger in the 1970s. From the streets of Harlem to the heights of unimaginable luxury, his story is one of ambition, cunning, and the consequences of a life lived on the edge of the law. In this video, we'll take you through the full story of Nicky Barnes, his rise from the streets, the empire he built, the battles he fought, the empire he ruled with both charm and fear, and ultimately the downfall that came as swiftly as his ascent. Along the way, we'll explore the world he controlled, the people who helped him, and the legacy he left behind, a legacy that still echoes through Harlem today. So buckle up as we dive into the life of Nicky Barnes, a man whose name became legend and whose story is as gripping as any crime saga ever told. Nicky Barnes was born in 1943 in the heart of Harlem, New York, a neighborhood bursting with culture, music, and the relentless pulse of city life. But behind the jazz and the bustling streets, poverty and hardship were a daily reality. Growing up, Barnes witnessed the struggles of his family and neighbors, learning early that survival in Harlem required more than just talent. It required cunning, toughness, and the ability to seize opportunity wherever it appeared. As a young boy, he roamed the streets, absorbing the rhythm and energy of the neighborhood, but also the harsh lessons that life in Harlem could teach. Schools were crowded, opportunities were scarce, and many young men were drawn to quick money, the lure of the streets, and the informal hierarchies that governed them. For Nicky, these early experiences planted the seeds of ambition and strategy, shaping a mind that would soon navigate the complex and dangerous world of organized crime. It wasn't long before he began testing the waters, hustling small trades, running errands, and learning the unspoken rules of the streets. Every alley, every corner, every interaction offered lessons, some harsh, some invaluable. In the backdrop, Harlem of the 1950s and 60s thrummed with life. Vintage cars rolled down Lenox Avenue, neon signs flickered outside clubs, and children played in the shadows of towering brownstones. Archival photos and street visuals capture this world, a neighborhood alive with culture, but shadowed by the realities that would define Barnes's path. Through these early struggles, Nicky Barnes was not just surviving. He was learning, observing, and preparing. The streets were his classroom, and the lessons he took would lay the foundation for an empire that few could imagine. By the late 1960s, Nicky Barnes had already proven himself on the streets of Harlem, But the true opportunity for power and wealth lay in the heroin trade, a dark undercurrent that coursed through the city. He began by connecting with seasoned operators, learning the intricacies of the business, distribution, trust, and the delicate balance of fear and respect. Every deal, every handshake, every whispered agreement taught him more about the system he was about to dominate. Barnes quickly formed relationships with influential figures in Harlem's underworld, men who would become his mentors and allies. They saw in him a rare combination of intelligence, charisma, and ruthless ambition. Through these connections, he gained access to networks that most could only dream of, and he began to carve out his own territory, meticulously building a name that demanded both admiration and caution. To consolidate power, he assembled a loyal inner circle known simply as the Council. This elite team operated like a well-oiled machine, handling everything from street-level sales to high-stakes negotiations, and ensuring that every corner of Harlem, and eventually beyond, answered to Barnes. Visualize warehouses stacked with heroin, shadowed street corners buzzing with activity, and discreet exchanges that went unnoticed by the wider world. Every move was calculated, every risk measured, and every success cemented his growing influence. Soon, his reach extended far beyond Harlem. Barnes's empire began to touch the streets of Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan, weaving a web of control that few could challenge. He was no longer just a player in the game. He was becoming its master, and the streets of New York City were about to feel the full weight of his ambition. By the early 1970s, Nicky Barnes had transformed from a street hustler into one of the wealthiest and most feared men in Harlem. His empire was vast, his influence unchallenged, and his reputation alone commanded respect and terror. The streets whispered his name, and everyone knew that crossing him came with consequences. Barnes's lifestyle reflected the empire he had built. Luxury cars lined the driveways of his Harlem brownstones. Mansions in the city and private jets for trips beyond the reach of his rivals showcased his extraordinary wealth. Gold chains glimmered under dim club lights, and lavish parties were filled with music, laughter, and an undercurrent of danger. Every gesture, every outfit, every entourage was carefully curated to display power and command attention. But wealth alone was not enough to maintain control. Barnes combined fear with loyalty, ensuring his inner circle, the Council, was fiercely devoted and ruthlessly efficient. Violence was a tool, not a spectacle. Betrayal was met with swift and permanent consequences. His rule was strategic, calculated, and uncompromising, making him untouchable in the eyes of both allies and enemies. Major events cemented his dominance. Key rival gangs were neutralized, major deals expanded his reach across New York City, and law enforcement investigations were carefully avoided or manipulated. Cinematic reenactments show Barnes stepping out of sleek black cars, overseeing warehouses filled with drugs and cash, and convening with the Council in dimly lit rooms, plotting the next move in a city that both feared and revered him. By now, Nicky Barnes was not just a man. He was a symbol, a living legend of Harlem, a kingpin whose rise would become the blueprint for ambition and audacity in the criminal underworld. At the height of his power, Nicky Barnes's empire was vast and sophisticated, stretching far beyond the streets of Harlem. He oversaw heroin distribution networks that funneled massive amounts of the drug into the city, using clever money laundering schemes and smuggling operations to conceal the flow of wealth. Every corner, every alley, every nightclub was connected to his intricate system, making him both untouchable and omnipresent. But power breeds enemies. Violent acts became part of the business. Rival gangs, competing dealers, and even former allies were eliminated or intimidated to maintain Barnes's dominance. Harlem became a chessboard, with Barnes always several moves ahead, orchestrating hits and negotiations that kept his rivals in check. Cinematic recreations show shadowy alleyway confrontations, tense warehouse exchanges, and the silent, watchful presence of his loyal council enforcing his will. His growing notoriety inevitably attracted the attention of law enforcement. Police raids, FBI investigations, and undercover operations were launched to dismantle his operation. Barnes was cunning, often staying one step ahead, yet the constant pressure from authorities added tension and danger to every deal. Archival newspaper clippings and courtroom visuals illustrate the public perception of his empire, a city both fascinated and horrified by his audacity. While Barnes's wealth and influence soared, the impact on Harlem was profound. Communities were caught in the crossfire of violence, addiction, and fear. Streets that once thrummed with music and life were shadowed by the consequences of his empire. Yet, for many, Barnes was also a figure of ambition and power, embodying a mix of fear, admiration, and the dark allure of success at any cost. By the late 1970s, it became clear that the world he had built so carefully carried cracks. Cracks that would eventually lead to one of the most dramatic downfalls in organized crime history. By the late 1970s, the empire Nicky Barnes had built so meticulously began to show cracks. The FBI and law enforcement had been watching, studying his every move, and slowly infiltrating his organization. Undercover agents and informants worked tirelessly, gathering evidence that would eventually expose the inner workings of Harlem's most notorious drug network. Every deal, every shipment, every meeting that once signified power now carried risk that could no longer be controlled. The arrests began to shake the foundations of his empire. Key lieutenants were taken down, court battles loomed, and the public scrutiny intensified. Barnes, once untouchable, now faced the full weight of the law. Archival courtroom footage, newspaper clippings, and cinematic recreations capture the tension of these moments. The kingpin brought before the system he once seemed to command. In a shocking turn, Barnes chose cooperation over defiance. He became an informant, part of what law enforcement called the Narcs, exposing former allies and providing critical testimony that dismantled much of the network he had once ruled. Betrayal, fear, and loyalty collided as those who once served him were forced into the light. and the streets of Harlem felt the ripple effects of his confession. Slowly but surely, Nicky Barnes's power crumbled. His wealth, influence, and fear-based authority evaporated, leaving behind a void in Harlem's criminal underworld. The community he had once dominated experienced both relief and chaos. The empire that had controlled their streets for years was gone, replaced by uncertainty, new rivalries, and the haunting legacy of the man who had once ruled it all. After years behind bars, Nicky Barnes was released into a world that had moved on without him. Gone were the mansions, the luxury cars, and the streets that once obeyed his every command. Exiled from Harlem and removed from the empire he had painstakingly built, he attempted to carve out a quieter life, one far removed from the violence, betrayal, and constant tension that had defined his years in power. In this new chapter, Barnes reflected on his past, the choices he had made, and the empire he had ruled with both brilliance and brutality. Interviews and later accounts show a man grappling with regret, pride, and the heavy weight of his legacy. Though he had lived a life few could imagine, he also understood the consequences, the lives disrupted, the streets scarred, and the morality that had been compromised in the name of ambition. In 2012, Nicky Barnes passed away, leaving behind a complicated legacy. Media outlets recounted his life with fascination, detailing the rise and fall of Harlem's infamous Kingpin. Community members remembered both the fear he inspired and the mark he left on the neighborhood, an indelible figure in the history of organized crime. His story, full of power, wealth, and ultimate downfall, remains a cautionary tale, a chapter in Harlem's history that continues to captivate, warn, and intrigue. Nicky Barnes' story did more than dominate the streets of Harlem. It left an indelible mark on organized crime and even pop culture. His rise and fall became a blueprint for ambition and audacity in the underworld, showing how intelligence, strategy, and ruthlessness could create an empire, but also how quickly it could all crumble. His name echoes in books, documentaries, and films, the archetype of the charismatic, calculating Kingpin brought to life in vivid reality. When compared to other notorious gangsters, Barnes stands out not just for his wealth or violence, but for the sophistication of his operations. Unlike street-level criminals, he combined fear, loyalty, and business acumen to control an entire city's underworld. He embodied the Kingpin archetype in its most complete form. Charismatic, strategic, feared, and ultimately flawed. Yet, beyond the legend, his life carries lessons. Power can be intoxicating, but unchecked greed leads to isolation and downfall. The alliances you forge can protect or betray you. Every decision has consequences, and no empire, no matter how meticulously built, is invincible. Nicky Barnes's life is a story of ambition, brilliance, and human frailty, a reminder that even kings fall, and that legacy is as much about caution as it is about notoriety. From the streets of Harlem to the heights of unimaginable wealth, Nicky Barnes's life was a story of ambition, power, and consequence. He rose from poverty to become the most feared and respected figure in the city's underworld, only to see it all crumble through betrayal, law enforcement, and the very system he once seemed to control. His legacy is a cautionary tale, a glimpse into the seductive allure of power and the price it demands. If you found this story captivating, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think was the turning point in Nicky Barnes' life?